One day, July 19th, things are about to change in Atlanta. From the mundane to life and death, there'll be no turning back. It's the dawn of a seismic shift in technological innovation. Things will unite. Things like smart refrigerators and Apple Watches, air traffic control technologies and environmental monitoring systems, space satellite communication networks, and even pacemakers embedded in the human body. And that, my friend, is only the beginning. Greetings, everyone, and welcome from the Technology Association of Georgia. It's Friday, July 1st, 2016, and this is Tech Talk. I'm your host, Frank Baia. It's the dawning of the sixth wave of technology advancement, and Atlanta has its mindset on being at the center of a world created by the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, IoT. Preceded by mainframes, microprocessors, PCs, desktop internet, it will launch a mobile wave of innovation far bigger than anyone realizes. This one day will set in motion a comprehensive program specifically designed to galvanize Atlanta's technology community leaders on a goal to inform and inspire thought leaders, discussions, debates, and exploration of the exploding IoT industry and its impact on our state's economy and business ecosystem. Some 500 attendees, engaging keynote speakers, innovation talks, high-caliber roundtables, deep dive breakouts, networking, a VIP reception, and an all-delegate closing presentation. From the basics that every professional needs to know to the innovative ideas that are changing how you live, work, and play. The goal of this symposium is to spark ideas, facilitate conversations, and to explore the action needed to accomplish a single purpose: to position Georgia as a regional, national, and even global thought leader of IoT within the next 3 to 5 years. The world is beginning to acknowledge that the Internet of Things is rapidly emerging to become a global reality. On July 19th, things will change in Atlanta. Will you stay or should you go? When you know the facts, there is no decision. Up to the Tech Talk on the July 19th IoT Symposium, one day that will change things forever, we speak with the TAG Internet of Things event chair, Todd Peneguy. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Todd, welcome to Tech Talk.
Thanks, Frank.
Well, I've waited for this for a long time. Not really, not a long time, because the whole idea of the Internet of Things probably came to my reality. We have a tendency, I constantly say that the vernacular doesn't keep up with the constant change of technology, so we're always finding new terms and new phrases. And I started hearing about the IoT, I guess maybe a year ago. It was kind of in a buzz and discussion under the surface a little bit. I'm sure it was going on much sooner than that, but obviously when you have a chance to do what we do here, and that's to talk not just to segments vertically, but to discuss things horizontally, health IT and fintech and CRM and all of the others, that you can really get a grasp and understand in a way what the future is going to look like, and certainly IoT was that. Congratulations on taking the initiative to put the symposium together. I'm really excited for you and for the event and for obviously Atlanta and Georgia to participate. How did the TAG Internet of Things Symposium 2016, how did it come to be?
Yeah, well, I like to tell a story just because it helps to crystallize in people's minds, and this thing has come out of nowhere like a freight train, kind of like what you're saying. Most people were unaware of what this is and where it's heading. So I have the honor of sitting on two TAG society boards, Cloud and Mobility. And it was around this time last year, both societies independently decided they wanted to do some sort of a signature event in 2016, but they didn't know exactly what. They were thinking about a job fair or a hackathon or a gala or some sort of an awards banquet. And then fast forward about 6 months to November of last year, and both boards independently and with quite a bit of passion decided they wanted to do it on the Internet of Things. In fact, the Mobility Board wanted to change their name to Mobility and the Internet of Things. And because it's become such a hot topic, we're told no, stick with mobility because this impacts all of TAG. And so being privy to both conversations, I suggested, hey, why don't we work together? And both boards voted and said, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do it. And then I'm thinking less work, and I'll volunteer to chair this thing, and that's how it all began.
Okay, you were the guy in the room that stepped out to go to the men's room and came back, and you were the chair, huh? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, I can imagine it is like a train. One of the things I was citing earlier is that there's kind of like a moment where there's nothing, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's everywhere. And if you get ahead of that, or you become, I think that's part of the fintech movement, for example, and even obviously mobility as far as Atlanta is concerned. I think when we talk about where Georgia leads, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we were pioneers or early adopters or early embracers of a lot of what would have been considered kind of disruptive, for lack of a better term, or an overused one, as far as the Internet of Things are concerned. I understand that you're kind of approaching this kind of uniquely. Maybe go into what's different about this event versus a lot of the others that happen.
Yeah, so, I mean, literally from the very beginning, this is very different. As soon as we got the go-ahead that evening, I sent out emails to both boards and a few executives that I've met through TAG over the years, and within a week we had over 40 people volunteering to help out. And what's really interesting is over half of them were senior executives of some pretty big companies in Atlanta, and I'm talking CIOs, CTOs, and SVPs of companies like Global Payments, First Data, Equifax, Coca-Cola, Racetrack, Aaron's, Rollins, Southern Company, the Atlanta Falcons, Emory, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Kennesaw State University, Cobb and Fulton County Schools, Cobb and Fulton County Governments, and I'm thinking, holy cow, man, are you kidding me? And let me state this. I'm not that important in Atlanta. I'm average at best, so it's not me. There's certainly something about this topic that's driving a lot of passion and interest.
Well, I think, well, first off is that, there's a philosophy that says when the teacher's ready, the student appears, the student is ready, the teacher appears. I have a tendency to think that leadership happens that same way. It took your initiative and the idea of bringing together what might have been siloed efforts to combine into something that I think is going to turn out to be really special. But it was the moment to do it, obviously. And, another thing, there's so many things that are happening. I heard a term the other day called omnicommerce, which I hadn't heard before. Maybe you have, but it was talking about, in this particular case, the new stadium and the use of, say, for example, NCR to handle all of the transactions within the confines of a single environment. And obviously that has to do with mobility. It has to do with a lot of applications that get interplayed in one kind of another. I think the Internet of Things is sort of the omnipresence of all of the technology that every one of those organizations, and probably a heck of a lot more, represent vertically. But obviously as we finally and ultimately see the promise of the net and the cloud, and we get into something like convergence that we've only talked about seemingly for, in my case, probably for 30 or 40 years, I think that this is really happening now because of what I think we're calling Industry 4.0. I thought that was an intriguing term to be. Is that something that's generally beginning to be discussed, the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, that's exactly it, and that's what's so important about this event is there's been a bit of quite a few serendipitous type moments since the beginning. So to accommodate schedules of all the executives, we had 2 kickoff meetings in December, and after the first one, interestingly enough, there was a TAG event put on by the Systems Engineering Society on the Internet of Things. And I had the honor of seeing a guy named Alan Loche speak. He's got a crazy title. He's the executive director for the Center of Development of the Application of Internet of Things Technologies at the Georgia Tech Research Institute.
Can that fit on one card?
Yeah, exactly, right? But breaking it down, he's from France, and Alan has an incredibly infectious personality. He's brilliant. And I learned 2 things from him during that event that literally changed the trajectory of my professional career. The first one is you're talking about, Industry 4.0, and I was completely ignorant to what that was. And what he said is that we're on the precipice of the fourth industrial revolution. And then I asked him to define that. And he says, well, the first one started in England, and that was steam-powered engines back in the 1700s. The second one was established here in the United States, and it was electricity and the assembly line at the turn of last century. And then the computer industrial revolution, which happened in America in the 50s and 60s. And out of that, we've had 5 waves of technology innovation, starting with mainframes, then microprocessors, then we go into PCs, desktop internet, and then the mobile wave. We're now entering the 6th wave of the 3rd industrial revolution, which is this Internet of Everything, and it's so massive that it's propelling us into what they're calling the 4th industrial revolution. And that's pretty big. I mean, have you are you savvy to the magnitude of this thing?
Well, when you describe, I think it's really obviously it's brilliant the way he's described it, and it's someone that has analyzed and looked into it, and struggled, if you will, over the terminology to get it defined. I have to admit, though, that while you were going through the waves and whatever, I've been hearing when the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter is aligned with Mars. I mean, it began to sound kind of esoterically so, kind of abstract that how could this actually be? But then when you break it down into the waves and talk about the next step, clearly, I get it. I think a lot of people get it. The obvious, for years we talked about an idea economy, innovation economy. Where does it end when you've got the Internet of Things in terms of the possibilities of what can be engaged and embraced within the confines of what I'm guessing? Do they have terms for it in terms of, is there a platform, a universe? What do they? Is there a centralized, like we would have said, the Internet? Is there a place for the Internet of Things, or it just happens in the same infrastructure and access, like you say, mobile that we've already gotten used to using?
Well, there is a new architecture that's coming out. There's so we're accustomed to what is effectively the Internet for humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
It allows for heavier type data, like streaming videos and phone calls and whatever, surfing the Internet. But there's a newer architecture. It's actually technology that's been out for a while. They're just the convergence of sensors and things and devices with the telecommunications industry is fostering this, and it's called, there's 2 competing technologies. One is LoRaWAN, which is low energy, long range, wide area networks, and the other one is Sigfox, which is coming out of France. And it's an internet for things, just that, for these little tiny bits of information that need to go from one place to another. And, areas of the world are starting to implement this newer architecture to enable, more devices to communicate, to give real-time feedback on what's going on with your factory, as an example.
Sure. I mean, machine to machine, computer to computer. I mean, again, that's why I was mentioning, is there, you called it architecture. I was struggling for platform or something because I'm going to guess that the actual, when we think of source to consumption, the consumption aspect of it is probably going to be ubiquitous. So the idea of how things occur in this environment on this architecture will happen, based on profiling and analytics and a whole lot of actions and reactions and those kind of things. But at some point, I'm guessing, players are going to have to participate. So they're going to have to not only do the individual aspects of making themselves mobile, is that would be the right term? If I'm going to be involved in the Internet of Things, was it Six-Pack you called it?
Sigfox.
Sigfox. Well, you know where my mind is, Six-Pack.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
but how does maybe, is it too early to even discuss how that process occurs? I mean, let's say that I'm someone like a financial payments global player, and I'm not involved but want to get involved. Is it just a flick of a switch based on whatever mobile and e-commerce platforms I'm already playing with, or is it a evolution that gets adopted like the URL of a website, or is that gotten to that sophistication yet?
Well, it's a little bit of both, but let me take a step back and go back to the conversation with Alan Loche from GTRI, right? So when you look at the idea that we're on the precipice of this 4th industrial revolution, the second thing I learned from him is if we get our heads up and look globally at who's leading on this, it's not the United States. The Germans are leading this charge. Back in 2011, they coined the phrase the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And if you go to Wiki, it's born out of the German government. And they're galvanizing their entire country to convert, one of the only Western societies not to outsource manufacturing. And they're starting to convert all their manufacturing plants over to this
Wow.
Internet of Things, right? And then secondly, the Chinese late last year came out with their manifesto, which is Made in China 2025. And if you strip away all the rhetoric and the marketing material, it basically says they have to compete against the Germans, not the United States. So when I was sitting there listening to Alan speak and seeing that we're on the precipice of this, the Greeks had two words for time. There's chronos, which is the passage of time, and then a lesser-known word, which is pronounced kairos, which means the perfect or opportune moment in time. And this is literally the stars aligning, as you're saying earlier. This is a kairos moment in time in the United States. In this fourth industrial revolution, we're behind. And then I'm looking around the United States, who's already behind, and I'm thinking Atlanta surely is positioned to take the lead on this, right? We have what I call the most powerful technical ecosystem in the world. And I define that in terms of TAG, which is the biggest technology association in North America. And it's one of the biggest in the world.
Right.
Then there's the community partners that, along with TAG, like the Georgia CIO Leadership Association or Atlanta Telecom Professionals or TechBridge or MAC or GNFCC or Cobra Gwinnett Chambers. And you've got the University System of Georgia with Georgia Tech, a global player in technology, intellectual capital.
Well, and on and on. I mean, there's so many, there are the layers and tentacles, but go ahead, I get it, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the cadence at which our leadership gets together in Georgia to share ideas, help each other solve problems, or simply give back to our community, there's nothing like this anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And I've literally talked to hundreds of senior executives who are from Asia and Europe and Silicon Valley and the Northeast, and every single one of them say, you're right. So then my point is, okay, here's the hypothesis I'm working with. If we have this incredibly connected, powerful ecosystem in Georgia, why aren't we leading on a global basis? And that has become the driving force behind what this event is and what we're trying to communicate and accomplish.
Well, when you take a look at some of the things that have happened, especially over the last decade, maybe 2 decades, it's hard to believe that anything can't be accomplished. Certainly when we go back to something you might just say is traditional, but it was pretty wild and crazy for its time, and that was going after the Olympics in '96. And there were a lot of people who said we can't get people together. There's too many, barriers. Everybody's in silos. Nobody wants to collaborate. Everybody wants to compete. I think that obviously those days have changed, and what you're describing is an ecosystem of collaboration and cooperation that really has spurred unbelievable amounts of innovation, and all of the things that a lot of our listeners, you and I both know and understand, is that that group that you're describing. Probably the obvious question would be, can Georgia be a leader in this particular environment? Just how realistic is it really? And when you journey of 1,000 miles, where do you start?
So when I say we, it's literally dozens of people and a bunch of senior executives were bashing our heads against the wall. Where do you start for this, right? So not only is the United States behind the world, but Atlanta is behind other areas of the United States like New York, Chicago, Boston, Pittsburgh, Austin, Texas, Silicon Valley. I just read an article last week in Forbes where I think it's Cincinnati, Ohio is positioning themselves to be the America's fourth industrial revolution test city. And here's Atlanta with this ecosystem, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Why aren't we leading on this? Truly, we're uniquely positioned to be a leader. So,
but in all fairness, some of the challenges have coming from, in some of the areas that you're describing, not all of them, but some of them have had some really disastrous impact as far as their economies are concerned, and are trying to figure out how to rise out of whatever opportunities are represented. And certainly the old industrial model wasn't going to work. I think in all fairness to what's going on as far as Atlanta and Georgia is concerned, is we've been leading in so many areas and developing so many innovations of so many different ways that how many times is sadly, in fact, sometimes, and I apologize even I was about to say sometimes I tell people I'm too busy, and why I'm laughing is that our listeners don't know that we had a little bit of a problem getting together on the interview because I had to reschedule. But I think sadly most of the people say, Frank, I'm just really so snowed. I'm just too busy. I'm too busy. I don't mean to drag that point on because I think it's a case where it's more, and I'm sure I'm going to learn those Greek terms, but it is the moment. That moment, there's a Eastern philosophy says the moment of non-existence before existence. This is the time, this is the place. All of the alchemy, if you will, the chemistry, the electricity, literally, figuratively, is sitting right here. So go ahead. I didn't mean to step on it, but I can't tell you how excited I am for you, Todd. I think that it's so cool, and what you're doing is so right on, and to be doing what you're doing is just really, really special, really important. So go ahead and continue. I didn't mean to step on what you were saying.
No worries, and thank you, by the way, for the kind words. And this literally is a perfect moment. So even though the trains left the station, that was a follow-up meeting with Alan Loche, and those are his words, we have this ecosystem in Atlanta that is uniquely positioned for us to truly leapfrog. What's needed is just to connect a couple of dots. So as we're looking, all right, do we focus on smart cities, or do we focus on, transportation tech? Do we focus on security? And regarding security, it's one of the hottest topics. We immediately said no. Mm-hmm. It's too dark and ominous. There'll be a cloud, metaphorically speaking, over the event, and people are going to need a big hug afterwards just because it's so depressing.
Yeah.
We want to focus on what we're doing right here. So after a lot of debate, we finally settled on two fundamental building blocks: education and infrastructure. So education, let's start there, right? Georgia has an unemployment rate of less than 1% in the tech sector, and this is a problem that's common in a lot of places. And that's because we don't have the talent to fill those jobs. And that's in spite of hundreds of companies that are outsourcing jobs to other countries or raiding other countries to bring talent here. And I think that's fantastic. But in spite of that, we still have a shortage. So the question then becomes, all right, what do we have to do to create some sort of public-private consortium to where we're educating kids in K through 12 to go into STEM programs? And what do we have to do with the universities to make sure that the kids who are graduating are ready to take on some of these jobs? And then I think this is even more important. I read an article just today that Alan Loche sent over to me, and it's entitled that the Germans are crushing the U.S. when it comes to IoT. And part of the reason is they're taking people in mid-career and giving them continuing education to take on these jobs. And that's something the U.S. is doing a horrible job at, is repatriating jobs by, we have people, tens of millions that are unemployed or underemployed. Well, what if we really focused on teaching them how to take on the positions that are desperately needed in this high-tech revolution that we're experiencing?
And you were mentioning, well, first off is that we're quickly running out of time, Todd, and I think this warrants another interview in terms of let's go ahead and launch the discussion. Certainly there's a lot of publicity and a lot of buzz about it already, but let Tag Radio and Tech Talk do a little bit of helping to support some of that momentum. But I'm going to ask that we get an opportunity to reschedule another opportunity to continue the dialogue. And so that the event is, I believe, is in July. Is it July 19th? Am I right?
That is correct.
Okay. Maybe go into some specifics now because we're going to have to close. But as to how would I get more information, and obviously, I'm assuming a website and that kind of thing, or how they make contact with you, and what are you looking for? I mean, obviously you want attendees, but are you looking for underwriters, sponsors, participants? And I go into a little bit of that as we close.
Oh, all the above. Real quickly, the second thing is infrastructure. There's City of Alpharetta 20 years ago. Before they built the city up, it was farmland. They dug underground, laid fiber cable. And because of that, we now have hundreds of tech companies that call Alpharetta, Georgia home. We want to apply that kind of thinking across the state of Georgia. In terms of our audience, the only way that we're going to truly emerge as a global leader in 3 to 5 years is to do just that, to galvanize leaders. So our audience is laser focused on the CXO, the executive suite, and direct reports. And assuming we get the right people there, the kind of individuals that aren't afraid to roll up their sleeves and make things happen versus making excuses, I think Georgia is absolutely positioned to be a global leader with the talent in place, the infrastructure being built up to truly emerge as this global leader. In terms of the website, it's iotga.org. There's also a LinkedIn group. It's the Internet of Things Technology Association of Georgia. We're also on Twitter at IoT_GA, and we're slowly building up our social media presence, and there'll be a lot more information coming out in the near future.
I've been around and seen some of the evolution of some of the things that started from just conversation and evolved into whatever was next, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't mean to minimize them, but without question, Todd, 2 years, 5 years from now, this is going to happen, and it's going to find its roots and its originality from the premise of where the vision began, or at least to begin to consolidate to the point where Georgia can become the leader that you're describing. Will turn to an individual named Todd, and I think that is something really great and something you should really feel strong about in terms of realizing that, and you mentioned it earlier about not necessarily being someone special. Sometimes it's not a case of looking for something, it's a case of finding something, and I think you found something that is incredibly important to a lot of people. Thank you a lot for what you're doing. I would wish you success. I only hope I can get invited to participate because I know you're going to be successful. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to invite you back. But for today, thanks so much for taking time out of a really busy schedule to join us for a few minutes on Tech Talk.
Thank you very much, Frank. I greatly appreciate it.